hits for the bench. Extra attacker coming on to even things up. To the net, Albertson scores!
The Extra Attackers Podcast with Maude and Jordan.
Welcome back to the Extra Attackers Podcast, everyone. Maude and Jordan back here once again. The biggest news being this team right behind me this week is the Ottawa Senators have finally moved on from head coach DJ Smith, and they even played their first game under the new coach Jacques Martin, a loss to the Arizona Coyotes where they blew a 3-0 lead. So vibes in Sensland, they kind of picked up a little bit before that Coyotes game, but they are already back to like rock bottom as soon as we saw how that game played out. How are you feeling about the Sens, Jordan?
I mean, I was just like, while you were talking, I was thinking, it's crazy how we went out, like when we created this podcast, we went out with the idea that we wanted to make something that talked about the NHL, like primarily as a whole. And while we have done that, so much of it has been infested by the Sens and everything happening because they've just been at the top of headlines consistently. And that part is frustrating. You were hoping that it would be like, yeah, they're doing well, and that's all we'd have to say. But that's not the reality of it right now.
Yeah, it seems that the Sens are one of the main characters of the NHL. Despite never being good, it's just always pure drama. So we had done a few segments on this show already talking about how we were hoping to see the team move on from DJ Smith. I think you would probably agree with me that it took way too long for them to do so, right?
Yeah, I would agree. It should have happened like a couple of weeks ago, to be honest. I heard what Steo said in his interview after the firing, and he was basically like, we saw like the good 4 or 5 game sample size where they only went 3-2, by the way, but they did play better, admittedly. And he was like, okay, I kind of see progress here, but then they just immediately regressed back to what they were. And it wasn't even just they're not playing as well. Like, this was hard regression, like crazy, losing, going up in like multiple games and still finding a way to lose. It was incredible. So it did happen too late, and it's hard to talk about in the sense that it's kind of an unsalvageable season at this point. Like, it's just nothing they can do.
That's the worst part. Is last season, I think it was a couple weeks into November, we were already saying the season is toast. We lasted a little longer this season, but really only because of the weird schedule and all the games in hand that we had. So it just kind of delayed the inevitable where we were like, okay, yeah, we're in last place, but we've only played 16 games and everyone else has played 22. But if we had played the same number of games as everyone at that point, we probably would have already been sunk because the team just sucks. Exactly.
And that was the talking point, like before, like, oh, they'll just make up those games. Like, yeah, it'll be fine. Our record isn't that bad. We've lost all that ground. Like, we have to go on a ridiculous point percentage run, something like winning 35 of our last 50 games, something crazy like that, to get literally just to the line where you make the playoffs.
Mm-hmm. And you mentioned that 5-game stretch or whatever from before this losing streak. And sometimes it's a little baffling to me how the Sens would occasionally have these tiny stretches where they impress you, but they could never turn it into a big winning streak. Like in that 5-game stretch, we were 3-2, but it was just win one and then lose one. I think there was 2 consecutive wins, I think, against Seattle and the Rangers, but then a loss against the Leafs where they still played pretty well, but lost the goaltending duel. So I kind of had a little bit of hope, but I knew that the road trip against these top teams in Dallas and Vegas and Colorado was going to go poorly, and
you're very right.
Yeah, it went about as bad as anyone could have possibly anticipated. So it's so tough. I feel like just despite the bad starts and the bad losing streaks, I feel like one of the biggest problems with the Sens under DJ Smith is never being able to actually put a win streak together to make up for those losing streaks. Our best moments that we were championing was a little 5-game stretch where we went 3-2, which is just not good enough.
Now, the craziest part too, the Sens are 11, 15-0. They haven't made it to overtime once and lost.
Yeah, a couple of wins, but one was in a shootout and the other one was about to go to a shootout before Stützle did the unthinkable. So this team is just unable to get to overtime, basically.
I think Locked On the Locked On podcast said it, but it was something like the Sens have not gone to overtime in North America this season. Both those
Exactly.
games were in Sweden, which
Yep.
is absolutely crazy. And it really speaks to the fragility of this team mentally. And that's been the craziest part. Like, I've seen them not play well and lose. I've seen them not play well and win. I have never seen them play really well for one period and then just crater. Like, they go up by 2 goals. Arizona, 3 goals, and then they lose 4-3. Like, how is that possible? Some of it is some untimely bad goals, admittedly, that has happened. But there's absolutely no sort of way for them to come together and be like, okay, this has to stop. And I think part of that is just because there's so much of a lack of accountability on the team, a lack of structure as well. But the biggest thing for me is that it felt like the players could just do whatever they wanted and they would just keep playing. It was insane to me that in the game in Arizona, Jacques Martin and Alfie on the bench were both shown multiple times talking to players right after a shift. Or even in one case, I think Alfie kind of ridiculed Casti for not finishing a check, right? Like, I have never, ever, ever seen that with DJ Smith or any of his assistants. And while I do really want to be consistent on the fact that I think DJ is a really good person and I hope he finds work elsewhere, it wasn't right now. He couldn't, it sounds bad, but he couldn't be mean enough. Like, he had to tell players, no, you're not doing this right. You're getting benched. Or no, this is what you're doing wrong. This is how we're going to improve. Or after games, instead of saying, hey, we just didn't get the bounces, being like, yeah, this is what we didn't do well. We have to be better next game. Like, in his first game, Jacques was like, yeah, we have like 3 or 4 solid things we need to work on after that performance. Never heard that from DJ. Never. It was always like bad bounces, which the goaltending was better. It was just poor luck. It was frustrating to hear, and I'm glad that's gone. But it sucks that that's what tanked the season.
You're 100% correct that you want the players to have a good relationship with the coach, but you can't have the coach being their best friend. And I know that the new coaches were obviously the storyline going into the game against Arizona, so they were the cameras and the production crew, like the director in the truck was probably looking for moments where it's like, let's try to show the coaches on the bench and see how they're teaching the players or interacting with the players in their first game behind the bench. But you are correct that with DJ Smith, we just never saw those shots of him like actually going up to a player and talking about something specific, or even whenever we would be allowing all these goals like in the second period, and these goals in quick succession, like within a minute happening all the time. It always just cuts to him and he just has a blank face chewing his gum, and he doesn't react, doesn't yell, doesn't say anything, he doesn't really react after a goal unless he's trying to challenge the goal or anything like that and talking to the refs. So I was happy to see Alfie giving some pointers to the players. We saw, I think, both Jacques and Alfie talking to Tim Stützle on separate occasions, probably about puck management, because that's been an issue for him this season. And yeah, that moment with Kastelik and Alfie, I was glad that Alfie pointed that out to Kastelik, because I have to say, the fourth line on this team, if they're not finishing their checks, what the hell are they doing? They're not good for anything if they're not finishing their checks. So I think Alfie knows that these are the type of players that need to be putting in that physical work. Otherwise, why are they on the roster?
Exactly. Like, they don't have the skill down there to really do anything else. No offense to Mark Kastelik and Parker Kelly. They worked hard to get to the NHL, but they're not going to be players that score. That's not the point. The point is for them to redirect a lot of hatred, vitriol towards them instead of the top end players, so Brady doesn't have to go to the box for 5 minutes. But currently, Brady has the most penalty minutes in the entire NHL. So clearly, it hasn't been good enough. So yeah, I think it's good that Alfie was like harping on that. He deserved it, Kastelik. Yeah. The funny thing to me too is, of course, every other team after getting a new coach immediately won their next game and has like a pretty good record. Yep. It is so incredibly Sens to go out there and lose your first game, especially in that faction. Like 4 unanswered goals. It's absolutely crazy.
It was so depressing. I was gonna bring that up too. It's just, The Oilers are in a 3-game losing streak right now, but they did at least get the 8-game win streak before that. So a little bit of more than a little bit of the new coach bump. Minnesota has still been doing really well since their coaching change. I don't remember what the record is at this point, but they've only lost a couple games since making the change. And I think the Blues are 2-1 because it's been less time. They had fired their coach right before the game against the Sens last week, and it's like, of course they beat the Sens in their first game with a new coach. But then when the Sens fire their coach, they just totally shit the bed anyway. On one hand, I think it's understandable that we still sucked against Arizona because Jacques was taking the approach of like, okay, I don't want to radically change the system right away and have the players do a completely different system that they're not used to because it would be too much too fast, too many changes too quickly. So he wanted to just go out there and kind of evaluate what the current system is and how the players are executing it, and then see how he needs to change it. Because like you said, he was quoted as like, oh, there's a few major things that we need to change already that he noticed in that game, because he wasn't he was brought on a couple weeks ago as a coaching advisor, but he wasn't on the bench at all, right? So it was his first time to get behind the bench and actually see up close how the team is playing and how it needs to be changed, instead of just coming in right away and being like, okay, this is how I like to coach my team, so we have to do it this way. I do like that he is at least taking the mindset of, this is how the players know how to play, this is how, and then what can we do to change it for the better and make it actually work better. And I'm sure that in a couple months the system is going to be completely different, but I get that he wouldn't do radical changes right away. But I do wonder with those other teams, and we're not really going to have an answer for this, but I wonder how drastically those other teams who fired their coaches really changed their systems too quickly too, because I doubt that those new coaches on the other teams came in and were just like, all right, we're switching it up right away. Like, they probably took a similar approach, and yet all those teams still got the new coaching bump for at least a little bit, for at least a couple of games. And the Sens playing Colorado tonight, I don't exactly expect that that's going to go very well, even though I would hope that they can improve over the Arizona performance. So just the lack of a new coach bump to even get the win in the first game just kind of makes me feel like there's definitely going to be some deeper issues with this roster other than just the coaching, I think.
That's a good point. And like another thing to consider too, like definitely there's a psychological aspect involved for players. Like, there's a different mindset when a new coach comes in. But when you look at the coaches that have been fired, Craig Berube, Dean Evanson, and Jack Woodcroft, those are all decent coaches. Like, for the most part, Woodcroft had a really good winning percentage. So did Evanson. For the most part, he took Minnesota to the playoffs a couple times, and Berube won a Stanley Cup. So clearly these guys have some like decent talent at the very least. So I'm wondering if when a new coach came in, it was more of just like retooling, maybe instituting like minor changes that were just coach preference, but the players were already kind of familiar, and it just took like the psychological change that pushed them being like, oh crap, they fired the coach. Players are next if we don't improve.
That's a good point.
Maybe that like motivated them. Whereas again, I love DJ as a person. He probably was one of the worst coaches in the NHL before he got fired.
Just on track record alone, it's like
just on
it's
track
undeniable.
Record. Yeah. No, you're completely right. And like, this is a testament to how good of a person he is. I feel bad for saying that, but it's the truth. He was probably one of the worst. And watching the Sens games, watching the defensive lapses continually, and watching how every single goaltender who comes to Ottawa for the most part has worse numbers than before, and they go up when they leave.
Yep.
Cam Talbot, Philip Gustafson, go right up after they get out of that system. And even defenders, like almost every single defender that came through Ottawa and played like a decent amount of games, like at least 30 games under DJ Smith, had massive regression in their defensive numbers. They leave, instant improvement. It doesn't mean that those players suddenly became world beaters, but it does show that they were better without DJ. And that's the thing. They could never get the defense down.
It's a disturbing trend with the defense and the goalies. Like, I feel like a similar thing will probably happen with Anton Forsberg as well. I feel like since he's on an expiring contract, he won't be here much longer, and then he'll go somewhere else, and it's like, oh my god, he's so good again. How did this happen? And Korpisalo a little bit too. Obviously, he had good numbers in after the trade deadline with LA, and even though Columbus wasn't good last year, he still had better numbers with them than he does now. You come to Ottawa and you're just instantly worse. It's depressing.
Yeah. Like even watching Korpisalo too, like he'll make about 10 high danger saves in one period.
Mm-hmm.
And then in like the second or third, he'll let in a weak goal. And it's kind of like, well, he's tired and he's bailed you guys out so many times. Eventually, like a crappy one's probably going to go in, right? Yeah. So I honestly don't really put a lot of blame on the goalies. Like, have they allowed bad goals? Yes. But at the same time, they are getting zero support in 80% of every game they play.
Exactly. It's probably a bit of a mental struggle for Korpisalo too, and you can see him getting frustrated during some of the games, like that Florida game a few weeks ago, and where you can't blame him at all because it's just he's getting absolutely hung out to dry. And yeah, not all the goals that go in on him are great, but like you said, that Arizona game, we could have been losing much earlier than we ended up being. Like we stayed in the lead for much longer than we really should have, just because Korpisalo was playing really well. And yeah, that Keller goal was weak, but at a certain point, you need to play for your goalie and allow him a little bit of leeway. You shouldn't obviously you shouldn't expect for like, oh, we need to spot our goalie at one bad goal, but when you have a 3-0 lead, shit happens, right? A couple of the other goals were lucky bounces, so you need to actually pick it up and play well and not just rely on your goaltender at that point. It sucks because I think Korpisalo can be a good goalie who can win you some games for this team, but he's not the type of goalie to just steal you games, which is making me think that with the way this team is built and the way this team was coached, that his contract is looking not like a great signing. Like, I don't really think it's worth $5 million for the level of play that he can give you, but it also definitely isn't his fault, just because if even at the $5 million cap hit, if you put him on a good team,
I think it's $4 million.
$4 million? Okay.
I think it's
$4 million 5 years, right?
Yeah.
So $4 million still not as bad, but I think it's a little sketchy just because of the term of the contract. But again, right, like we were saying with the other goalies, if he gets moved to a good team, he's going to be fine again. It's just this team being incapable of defending and incapable of helping out their goalies.
Yeah. Yeah, and the thing is, too, that we're seeing a trend in the NHL now where teams are going towards having, like, not necessarily a star goaltender. Like, you think about Vegas, that one with Adin Hill. And I don't think Adin Hill is a bad goalie by any means, but when they signed him, I think they traded for him, actually. But when they traded for him, he was like a depth goalie, like, at that point. Like, he was a decent backup at best. But they had the structure to insulate him, giving him the best chance to succeed, and it's helped him grow. He's doing very well this season after that. So I think giving goaltenders an environment where they can succeed will greatly benefit your team, and that's kind of where the NHL is trending anyway. So having a goalie like Korpisalo, who's not necessarily going to steal you a game, but will be competent for most of the game, is something that I think you can still win with if your team is built well enough. Clearly, with the coaching and maybe some of the roster decisions, that isn't the case right now. But that's where you have to kind of hope the trend goes, because either way, you're kind of locked into this contract. And I still have hope. Like, I agree in that, like, it hasn't been an amazing start. But again, I don't think that's entirely his fault. And I think there's room to improve that's outside of just his play. So, yeah, there's like so many factors to consider with what's happening with the Sens right now. And like, as a Sens fan, I just feel bad for all other Sens fans. Like, this year was supposed to be different. This is supposed to be a season that you could get excited about and say, like, maybe I get to go to the CTC in June, or sorry, I should say May. I'm not that optimistic. But yeah, it's completely fallen on its face, and it's kind of rough to be like, here we are again.
Exactly. It feels like Groundhog Day from last season, where we wanted the coach fired at the beginning of last season, and they wouldn't do it. And again, they wouldn't do it for way too long this season, and it's another lost year.
Yeah.
In terms of like where the Sens go from here, what do you want to see for the rest of the season? Like, do you just want to see them bottom out and get a high draft pick, or are you hoping to see them turn things around and finish around 500? Because I think playoffs are just totally out of the question at this point, unless for like a complete miracle run, which with the way this team is built is not going to happen. they could improve things and give us some optimism, but they've kind of done that for the last 3 years, starting off horribly and then doing pretty well in the last couple months of the season to make the record look a little bit better and make us all optimistic going into the next year, and then they fall flat on their face again. So like, what are you hoping for? Are you kind of hoping that we just maybe go about 500 for the rest of the season and stay, 5-6 games below from where we are right now, just get a top 5 pick, or are you hoping to climb out a little bit and just see some good hockey games?
It's difficult because if you got like insanely lucky and you were bad enough that you got like a top 3 pick, that is something that would be invaluable to the team right now, because you basically insert like this draft isn't as good as the last one, obviously, but you could basically insert any player in that position right into your team, and you have a new either top 4 defender or top 6 forward. And that getting that at a entry level cap hit, it's super important, and it's something the Sens are lacking with their prospects right now. I think Ridley Grigg is the only player on the team that's currently on an ELC. Actually, Bernard Docker signed a new contract, so he's not on there either. And of course, we have the Sanderson extension, so he's
that'll kick in next year, right?
That'll kick in next year, so he's technically also on an ELC. But those are important years to capitalize on, and we haven't really been able to do that. Mm-hmm. So normally, when that happens, you reinvest in the farm system. But the Sens again have been trading away a lot of picks, and while like I do still think the Chychrun trade good overall, like I would still take it for what we gave up for him, even though he's been hit and miss. Maybe you don't make the DeBrincat trade in hindsight, but
definitely.
Even then at the time, it was a good trade, but maybe you want more due diligence on what DeBrincat's future plans are. But all that to say, we need to reinvigorate the farm system. And luckily we have 2 firsts this year, technically. So like that would help, and getting a high pick, of course, would help that. But all that being said, I do think it's very important, at least to me, to see some progress in terms of defensive structure and mental fragility in this team. As much as I would love the high draft pick and re-simmering the lottery website every day and looking at the top prospects, because prospects are exciting, I would feel so much better if we saw some tangible progression at the end of the season, even if, like, of course, like playoffs is a pipe dream, even if they just finish at 500, just being like, okay, that awful start was just torpedoed by DJ and his system. And the second they got some actually decent coaching, they knew what they had to do in the defensive zone. They had, they have an assistant coach like Alfie to backstop them when things are going off the rails. If they kind of learn from that and show that sort of progress, that'll make me much more optimistic for the next season. Because if they do finish like bottom 10, even worse, bottom 5, I would kind of not really know what they're going to be next season. I would just kind of be like, are we entering our own Buffalo run, where we're going to have like half a decade or a decade without playoffs? And that's not something I want anymore. It's already been 7 years.
Yeah, we're only 3 years away from that now. So
exactly. So for me, I would want to see some progression, even if it's at the expense of a draft pick. And the joke is that the Senators always play better to ruin their own draft pick. But in this case, I'd like to see it just have something to cling on to for next season. But what do you think, Maude?
I lean a little bit more towards just hoping that we stay in the basement, just because, like you said, our prospect cupboards are so bare. And like no one on entry level contracts anymore. We're already paying most of our guys for like the next 6, 7, 8 years. And you want to be able to win when you still have guys on cheap contracts. And obviously we haven't been able to do that. We're already paying everyone. So it's tough, because you definitely don't want to watch losing hockey for the rest of the year. I selfishly hope that we can just kind of be average for the rest of the year, not too terrible, and then just stay at a below 500 pace, just to be, like 5th or 6th last, and then hopefully get some luck in the draft lottery.
Finally.
Yeah, finally, which that's the thing. Maybe I shouldn't hope for that, though, because we never get luck in the draft lottery. It might not be a good thing to actually rely upon. But you're right that if this team can fix some of its major issues, even if it doesn't turn out to be like a huge winning run that gets us close to the playoffs, even if they can just stop being so bad in the second period, stop allowing so many goals in quick succession, stop blowing leads, be able to hold a lead and win a game like 3-2 or 2-1 or something like that. You just want to see improved play like that. So for me, I kind of want a top prospect just because the last few years I was of the mindset of like, oh, I just want to see this team improve and I don't care if we have a high draft pick because we've already had a bunch of them. Now we're here again, and we, like you said, we've traded away a lot of first round picks and prospects. So I'm just kind of like, oh shit, we could kind of use one in this case now.
That is true.
But overall, we just need some optimism. So however that may be able to come to us, whether it's through a high draft pick or the team actually improving and showing us signs of hope, I'll take it either way.
Yeah, that's super fair. I think like for me, just seeing progression, like there's been a lot of talk about it, but I legitimately think this roster is good enough to make the playoffs.
I agree. Yeah.
If you have a better coach, I think they can do that. Maybe like you fire Hamonic into the sun and then you actually trade for like a defensive right D to be behind Zub potentially. Like that would be helpful. But I do think that it's on paper, it is good enough. They could have been in a wild card spot. And if they like stay around the same place, like going 500, then maybe it won't be too bad. But if they like continue to be as awful as they are, then I'm going to start to seriously question that. And at that point, you need to seriously question, do we need to make a big cut? I'm sorry, I don't want to be the Maple Leafs where they just keep running it back and are just like eternally disappointing. Like maybe that changes this year. But I think that if that's what happened, you'd have to start asking serious questions about who do you take out? Who do you trade? Is it going to be a major piece? Is it just minor tinkering? So to save from all that, I would hope to see some progression.
Yeah, like you said, if we don't show progression for the rest of the season, we're probably going to be getting to those sort of questions about the players on the roster much quicker than if we actually have a semi-turnaround. But the Christmas break can't come soon enough for this team. Probably going to lose to Colorado before this episode is even posted. And then Pittsburgh for the next game. I mean, Pittsburgh at least sucks too. So maybe they can get a win there, but it's going to be rough. It's going to be rough for the rest of the season with the Sens. And not much to look forward to other than hoping that the new coaches can instill some good habits in this young core. But in terms of a team that is actually doing very well right now, a little bit surprising to me, but it's your second team, the Winnipeg Jets, on an absolute heater in the last month or so, 7-2-1 in their last 10. How are you feeling about the Jets? At least you can be positive about one of your teams.
I know. I feel sorry for you with Ottawa and Columbus, but
yeah, it's my own fault. It's my own fault for picking such shit teams.
Hey, they have sweet jerseys, so I don't even blame you.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Columbus, the Jets have been insane, and I didn't expect this at all. Scheifele has been very good. He's above point per game, I think, and same with Kyle Connor. Gabriel Velarde, though, the story. Dude has only played 13 games, but he's point per game right now. And in 15 less games played, he has more points than Dubois right now. So, I mean, as someone who really liked the trade at the time, I like it even more now. And I mean, you have Hellebuck to backstop you. He's insane. Morrissey, again, he's basically redoing what he did last year, which I never expected out of him.
Yeah, I thought the points would drop.
Exactly. I thought like realistically he was like a half a point a game defensive defenseman sort of deal. But no, he's like firing on all cylinders, which I never really thought he would get to that level, to be honest. But yeah, it's just been, and also Mason Appleton, I think, is doing very well. He has like 15 points or something.
Damn.
A bunch of role players that you wouldn't expect. They've all been boosted. And I honestly think like Rick Bowness has been a big help. I was a big fan with what he did in Dallas with that team, turning them into like a legitimate contender for the most part, taking them farther than other people expected. And I think he's had a similar effect on Winnipeg. And for a team that just re-upped two big stars in Scheifele and Hellebuck, I was really worried that you were just going to see like a very mediocre team that just kind of straddles the line between playoffs and just outside of wild card sort of deal. But they've been much better than that, which is good because that's kind of what you need, especially with all the talk at the start of the season of there's no fans coming to Jets games and things like that. You kind of needed this. So I'm glad the players have stepped up to the challenge. And I mean, all this could end. They could go like 2-8 and something and just ruin it. But right now, there's a lot of reasons to be confident, and I think they've earned that.
Yeah, like you said, I totally thought that they were just going to be a completely mid team after how last year ended with them. Kind of, they were really good until the last couple months of the season, and then they just sort of limped into the playoffs, and it was a pretty uninspired effort. I think losing in 4, was it a sweep against the Knights or was it 5 games? Do you remember?
It might have. I think it was 5. I think they took 1.
Yeah, I think they won the first game, but then
Yeah.
Vegas figured it out pretty quickly.
It wasn't hard.
So and then with all of the rumors in the offseason that Scheifele wasn't too happy and Blake Wheeler was on the outs, which was probably a good thing considering he's just been very average in New York so far this year. It seems like it was probably a good thing that they decided to move on from him. But the biggest shock for me so far is that Kyle Connor got injured a couple weeks ago, and which I think we talked about that on our last episode. We were surprised that Strome didn't get suspended.
Right.
And they've just still continued to score a bunch of goals. Like Gabriel Velarde came back from injury around that same time, maybe a couple games before Connor got injured, and he's just stepped onto that top line and been absolutely lethal. So they've been able to replace Kyle Connor's offense, which is ridiculous because he was near the top of the league in goal scoring. Obviously, no one else on the Jets can really do that, but as a team, the depth has been able to chip in, which is just awesome. And I think that was the part of the reason why they traded Dubois for the package that they did, was that they got 3 good forwards back who can play up and down your lineup. And Velarde himself, like you said, in terms of the point totals, he might be just as good as Dubois, if not better already in terms of point production. I think that the Kings got absolutely hosed in that trade, and to be honest, I don't know why they agreed to give up Velarde, because he was already good for them last season. I think he had 26 goals for them last year. So I don't know what the hell the Kings are thinking, and they're playing him like on their 3rd line now with already. And he's making $8.5 million playing behind Philippe Deno. Obviously, that was not the plan going into the season. So it seems like the whole thing turned out quite well for the Jets. And even though the Kings are still having a good season, and it could be much better if Dubois finds his scoring touch that we know he has, I don't think he's really worth $8.5 million, but he can definitely pick up his production and get back to around like 65, 70 point pace. But it seems like the Jets don't miss him at all.
Yeah, it really does seem like that. And ever since Dubois left Columbus, I've never loved him. His attitude has always kind of rubbed me the wrong way. I understand, like, as a player, you have every right and you should have the autonomy to choose where you go and where you want to be. But I feel like it is a sign of someone who recognizes that sometimes the sport is bigger than them when they're willing to play in markets that aren't as highlighted, or at least put in the effort in those markets when they're there. And effort was, at least for me, a big question with Dubois consistently, especially when he was in Winnipeg. He had some really good stretches, I'll admit, but he had other stretches where it was just rough. It was clear that he just didn't really want to be here, and it just affected his play. And we saw similar things at the end of his time in Columbus. So I'm not trying to insinuate that he's a bad person or anything, but it really seems that he's very particular in where he wants to be. And that kind of rubbed off on me the right way, or the wrong way, I should say. So I thought when he signed that contract in LA, I was kind of like, oh, okay, that's a swing. There's still time for it to work out, but I'm definitely happy that the Jets traded out of that.
I think you mentioned this, but it's so funny that Velarde has 1 more point than Dubois does in about half the games, or less than half of the games. And I'm just looking at it now. Dubois with 12 points in 29 games. He wouldn't even crack the top 10 on the Jets in scoring. Like, this is the list of players that would be ahead of him, or are ahead of him in production on the Jets. Scheifele, Connor, Morrissey, Ehlers, Perfetti, Niederreiter, Appleton, Nemestikov, Iafallo, Lowry, Velarde are all ahead of him, and Dylan DeMello has the same number of points. So
Dylan DeMello,
yeah, he also has 12 points. With, to be fair, 2 more games played, so maybe Dubois will use those games in hand and catch up and get ahead of Dylan DeMello. But holy crap, what a home run of a trade for the Jets so far. Like, I don't even know what the like contract situation is for Gabe Vilardi, but it's going to be, regardless of whether you have to pay him more money or not, it seems like he'll probably cost less than Dubois did, even while producing better than him. And then you still have Iafallo, who's chipping in the top 9 as a guy who can move up and down your lineup, play, penalty kill, power play, like second power play unit. And Rasmus Kupari, I think he's been in and out of the lineup. But he's a good little depth piece too. I think he might be in the minors right now. I'm not sure, but he has good production in the minors. So he's a guy who still might be able to become something. And did they get a first round pick as well? Was there a draft pick?
There was a draft pick. I don't know why I'm blanking. I don't think it was.
I don't remember.
I think it might have been a second.
Let's see.
Let me just let's check.
Let's hit up cap friendly. So the Jets don't have any future picks from the Kings. So if they did receive a pick, it would have already been used in the last draft. I don't remember when the trade was made exactly. Let's see trade history.
Okay. It was a 2024 second
round pick from Montreal. That's what it is. Yeah.
That's it. Okay, yes.
So that's another little extra asset too, that hopefully they can get a good prospect out of that. And even if they don't get a good prospect out of that, it's still a really good trade return. And Vilardi is signed through next season as well for only $3.4 million. So even if he slows down a bit and is only like a 40 to 50 point guy, maybe less ice time when Kyle Connor is back in the lineup, that's still great for the cap hit. And then he's still an RFA. So very nice cost controlled asset who's playing out of his mind right now.
And that's kind of what the Jets need. Like, having a player with RFA expiry is a great way to hopefully retain a players, because they do have a problem like losing people eventually. So honestly, the trade was kind of perfect for them. Cheveldayoff hit a home run.
Mm-hmm. And we were talking earlier, we mentioned a little bit about how teams are not really building from the net out anymore. Instead, you kind of make a strong system and defense core, and then you get goalies who can do the job, kind of like Adin Hill. But the Jets are the opposite of that, where they have one of the most expensive goalies in the game, and he is pulling his weight this season. This might be a Vezina year for Connor Hellebuyck, I think, because in terms of the top goaltending stats in the league, there's other guys ahead of him by a little bit, but those guys are all in those tandem setups where they don't play nearly as many games as Connor Hellebuyck does. Hellebuyck still plays like 70% of the games, as far as I'm aware. Because, he has 23 games. Brossoit only has 8. So I think Hellebuck's got to be the Vezina front runner at this point. Like, maybe Cam Talbot alongside him too, because Talbot does actually play a lot of the games as well for LA. So I think that's awesome that Hellebuyck committed to the Jets. He said, I don't want to go anywhere else. I want to stay here and actually stick behind this team and help turn them into a winner. And he's still in his absolutely elite form, and he might get that Vezina this year.
Yeah, like over the last couple of years, Hellebuyck has been crazy consistent. Like, it's incredible how he'll go out there and almost always have a good performance. He's, in my eyes, probably a top 3 goalie in the league for sure. Should have picked him on fantasy. That's that's my bad. But he's part of the identity of the team now too. So it's super important that they were able to get him, and I wasn't expecting it. That contract. So I'm more than happy. Keep going on, Jets. Bring me the little slice of happiness I can't get with the Sens.
Yeah, man, I wish I had picked him in fantasy too, because in the preseason and like in our predictions on our first episode of this show, we predicted them to be like on the fringe of the playoffs. So, and I was thinking like he hadn't even signed that extension yet, so I was thinking like he might even get like traded at the deadline. And he's not a goalie that I went with in either of my fantasy leagues, but I sure should have, because he's just consistent. He's automatic. Anytime that I match up against him, who like the opponent who has him in fantasy, I'm like, shit, that you don't want to see it. You don't want to be against him. So just awesome stuff for Winnipeg. Like you said, I am jealous of them. I wish that the Sens could do some shit like this, but they don't have that veteran presence that the Jets have with guys like Scheifele and Hellebuyck committing long term like that. Just like we have Giroux, but that's it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's nice that a lot of our young players are signed for like a good amount of time to pretty good cap hits. That's, I guess, the one good thing Dorian left us. But there's a lot more work to do to even get close to what the Jets are doing. So only time will tell.
Definitely. And I think that's where we're going to leave it here for today. Tale of two teams, one going way up in the standings and one sinking to the bottom for sure. So hopefully we'll be able to talk about some more positive stuff with the Sens in the future, but it may just end up being that we don't talk about them much for the rest of the season because
I wouldn't mind that.
Yeah, because even though they've been one of the main characters of the season so far, they are sinking deeply into irrelevancy for the foreseeable future until next year, it seems like. But maybe there will be some interesting moves in the future. So yeah, thanks everyone for watching and listening. If you enjoyed, please share it around.
Yeah, thanks everyone. You can catch us on Twitter or X. I'll just say Twitter at Extra Attackers, and also for just personally at Maude Show and at Saint of Stutzla if you want to engage with us in any way. But yeah, thanks everyone for watching, and happy holidays.